The bobcat was still very young, its fur speckled with snow, two skinny cubs clinging behind its legs, standing still on the porch of an old wooden cabin, right in the middle of an early spring snowstorm. It didn't howl. It didn't growl. It just raised its head, staring directly at the door, waiting. No one ever teaches a wild creature how to ask for help, but its eyes that day did something no language ever could. It was a morning so cold it cut to the bone, fog still lingering among cedar branches, and the forest silent as if it had just seen off a soul. Elise, the woman who lived reclusively in the woods, opened the door and found the creature waiting. Not running, not hiding, just standing there, as if it had pushed past instinct to trust in something greater than itself. But this wasn't the first time Elise had seen that plea. Months before, at this very porch, another bobcat, older, battered, had come carrying two cubs, one barely breathing, and it had nudged the cub toward the cabin door, then walked away. It had chosen to give its child's life to a human. What could ever make a wild creature stop fearing humans? This isn't just a story about an animal in need. It's a story about a promise, about a wild memory, still alive, and about how a bobcat found its way back. People say, if you live long enough in the deep woods, you begin to hear the whispers of the earth. Elise Thorne wasn't sure what she had heard, only that every morning, when the sky still felt damp like rags after a night rain, she would sit on the wooden porch, a mug of cold coffee in hand, gazing toward the cedar forest, expecting nothing, calling no one, just silent, as if that very silence was part of a ritual, needed to be accepted by the woods. The old cabin stood alone at the edge of the preserve, more than 20 miles from the nearest road. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, just books, binoculars, maps, trail cameras, and memories. Memories Elise never truly chose to carry, but they found her, like shadows clinging to her feet beneath moonlight. This was her third winter here since leaving the International Conservation Organization, since Nepal. Her old staff ID still sat in the drawer. The photo with Vincent, her colleague and the only person she ever trusted, had yellowed at the edges. He died in a fall while trying to rescue a trapped snow leopard. Elise wasn't fast enough to save him, not fast enough to say goodbye. They called it an accident. She thought it was the price of reaching for the line between wilderness and humanity without understanding the silence in a wild animal's eyes. After that, Elise withdrew. She returned to live in the wooden house inherited from her aunt, a midwife who once served the mountain communities, now long gone. She no longer worked for any organization, just quietly studied, setting up cameras, documenting the movements of gray wolves, elk, sometimes bobcats. The manuscripts she wrote were never submitted. She printed them out, tied them with string, and stored them in wooden boxes, as if writing them was her way of recording the forest's final song. Lately, she'd been dreaming often. In her dreams, she saw a wounded animal crawling through snow, leaving a trail of deep red behind. She ran after it, but the snow thickened. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the woods, as if it had never existed. Each morning she woke, her heart pounding, like it had all been real. Elise's daily routine was one of quiet. Morning, check the trail cameras. Noon, note data, record tracks, analyze scat and shed fur. Afternoon, boil water, stoke the wood stove, write more. Evening, reread old poetry by Mary Oliver or David White, sometimes just sit still, listening to snowfall. The only thing she allowed herself to stay attached to was an old Nikon D300S. The last thing she kept from Vincent. He used to wear it slung across his shoulder like a weapon. to capture the things we can't hold in our hands," he had said. Elise never used it to photograph people. This winter had come early. The forest shifted with dramatic silence, cedars covered in white all the way to their tips, trails vanished beneath snow, and even sound itself seemed buried. The wind didn't howl, it groaned, long and dry, like the voice of something that had slept for a very long time. But what caught Elise's attention most was the scent. There was a strange smell in the air, wet fur, clawed tree sap, and dried blood. She'd been trained to recognize that. Not to fear, but to know. Something was coming. And then that day arrived. That morning, as Elise downloaded data from the trail camera, one clip made her stop breathing. A blurred shape crossing the frame. Lean body, blood smeared red behind the right hind leg. A bobcat. It slipped through the snow, staggering. Stopped, turned, and looked straight into the lens. Into her eyes, as if it knew she was there. The footage ended just as the snow blurred the lens. She went still for a long time. There are certain looks not born of instinct, not born of fear, but more like a call she knew could not go unanswered. The trap snapped like a gunshot in her mind, a sharp sound that echoed in her bones. Elise hadn't even realized what happened before her body collapsed like a felled tree. Her knees sank deep into the snow, breath ragged. Only then came the pain. It didn't come first, not because it was small, but because it was too big for her brain to register at once. She screamed, pure instinct, but the sound sank into the forest like a stone into ice water. Useless. The steel trap, old, rusted, heavy, had sunk deep into her left leg, just inches above the ankle. The teeth were curved, thick, and not meant for foxes. Meant to kill. Her hands trembled as she fumbled through her coat pocket, pulling out a folding knife. It took nearly 5 minutes to pry each tooth open. Blood dripped onto the snow, dark red, strangely beautiful. When she finally pulled her leg free, she nearly passed out. Her heartbeat pounded at her temples. Everything was white, blank, and she realized she was in the middle of nowhere. That morning had started like any other. Elise had found a 17-second video on her trail cam. A bobcat, definitely female, stumbling through the snow. Blood trailed from her shoulder to her hind leg. Her eyes were wide, not panicked, but drained. Instead of fear, Elise felt summoned. Not out of pity, but by something stranger, the sense that it was seeking someone, not hiding, not running, but approaching something or someone to entrust. She put on her coat, grabbed the first aid kit, water, and some dry food. No weapons. No binoculars. Not even a phone. There was no signal here anyway. Snow still fell, the wet, heavy kind, clinging to branches, burying every sound. Elise followed the trail of blood and paw prints, light, clean, arched like half moons. A bobcat's tracks. She walked about 2 kilometers into the woods before she saw it, the trap hidden beneath fallen leaves, so well placed that without stepping on it, she might never have noticed. And then, everything fell apart. Now, Elise lay alone in the forest, snow up to her hips, blood soaking her pant leg. She dragged herself toward the base of a cedar tree, hands gripping a scarf knotted tightly around her ankle to slow the bleeding. The sun had tilted west. The sky began to gray. No one knew she was out here. She had left no note. The irony was, this very bobcat had led her here, a wounded creature, guiding a human who thought she was stronger, and now both were left behind. The wind screamed through ancient trees. Elise felt her eyelids numb. Her gloves are sticky with blood. In her mind, she thought of Vincent, of his eyes in that final moment when he too lay dying in the snow. So this is how I'll go too, she thought. And then a sound, soft, not loud, not sudden, just snow being compressed under claws, but enough to make Elise open her eyes. A shadow stood in the grey mist, low frame, strong build, pointed ears, fur matted and wet. A bobcat. It was her. Elise thought she was hallucinating, but then the bobcat stepped forward. Movement no longer firm, limping, slow. Blood trailed down her hind leg. Cold. Alone. But not afraid. She stopped about 3 meters from Elise. The wind lifted the fur on her neck, revealing a raw red gash. Blood is still fresh. Elise didn't move. She couldn't and didn't want to. Between them was the distance of 2 different species, but in the bobcat's eyes, there was no threat. Only presence. As if she had chosen to come, chosen to appear at the very moment Elise believed she could no longer be saved. She stood there, silent like a question or a calling. Elise had once thought that the most terrifying thing in the forest was the predator. But now the fear took a different shape. Solitude and silence. Elise woke up to a faint rustling sound. The snow wasn't falling as thickly as the day before, but the wind still came in waves, slicing the skin like thin knives. Pale blue morning light pierced through gaps in the branches, making the world look like a negative photograph, white-gray and silent. She lay beneath the rear porch of the cabin, her leg wrapped hastily in a torn old blanket. Eyes half closed, her body drifting between consciousness and fevered sleep. And then, again, the sound of those footsteps, not heavy, not hurried, gradually emerged from the snow. Elise opened her eyes. The bobcat was standing there. This time, not alone. 2 cubs stood behind her legs, wobbling, their fur fluffed up, backs hunched from the cold. One was slightly bigger, eyes lit with curiosity. The other, smaller, weaker, took a few steps, then slumped down, panting. All 3 had been battered by the snowstorm, but the mother's gaze remained unchanged. That gaze didn't belong to this world. She didn't look at Elise as an enemy, didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She simply looked. A look with no language, yet Elise felt as if her very soul was being laid bare. It wasn't the look of a wounded animal. It was the look of a mother. Elise had once written about them. In a research paper 10 years ago, she had described the bobcat as among the most mysterious creatures of the northern woods. No one has ever witnessed its birthing. No one has ever touched its den. What we know are just quiet paw prints along a frozen stream, or pointed ears rising from thickets as the snow melts. But now, an actual bobcat mother was stepping closer to her. A choice, voluntary. Not because she was forced, not because she was trapped, but because she needed Elise. Elise didn't know what had brought her back. Maybe instinct, maybe memory, or maybe because Elise, too, was a wounded creature, just like her. And in that strange moment, when wild eyes met human eyes, Elise realized the true enemy for both wasn't each other. It was winter. It was steel traps. It was the men with guns laying death beneath the white snow. It was the lost direction of those who were once strong. The bobcat stopped about 2 meters away. She didn't come closer, but didn't retreat either. The 2 cubs hid behind their mother's legs. Curious but wary, their small eyes flickered, lit up, then dimmed like sparks snuffed by the wind. Elise sat up, pain twisting her face. But she didn't speak, didn't breathe loudly. Just tilted her head very slowly, like bowing. A ritual no one had taught her, not found in any book, but right. She placed her hand on the snow, drawing a line that led to the back shed's door. An old place with blankets, a roof, and quiet, then pointed. Gently, without threat. The Bobcat mother looked, didn't react, just stood there, her thin fur catching the wind. After a long pause, she turned, nudged her cubs forward, and Elise knew they had chosen to trust. The shed door wasn't closed. Elise left it ajar, just enough for a creature to slip in, and enough for it to leave if it wished. That night she heard rustling, the sound of claws on wood. Then silence. No growls, no snarls, only breathing, software, thin, steady. She lay in the cabin, trembling with fever, and yet felt an odd sense of peace. In the midst of a deadly winter, there were 3 wild beings, also sheltering beneath the same wooden roof. No one saved anyone. No one owned anyone. They simply needed each other. She didn't remember how she got back to the cabin, only that the snow was thigh-deep, blood seeping from her bandages into each frozen crystal, leaving a long red trail like a bleeding wound across the forest's white skin. Every crawling step made her body scream in silence, but Elise didn't stop. She didn't dare. Behind her, something was walking along. Not fear, not darkness, but warmth. Quiet, patient, unleaving. The cabin door appeared like a ghost in the freezing mist. Elise collapsed on the steps, took nearly 2 minutes to find the key in her coat pocket. Her hands had gone stiff from the cold. When the lock finally turned, the old wooden door creaked open like a breath. Inside, no light, no fire. Just a block of shadowy, frigid stillness. But to Elise, it was the last place on earth she could still call home. She crawled in, the door closing behind her, and there was only herself. With trembling hands, she lit the stove, coaxing the first flames from dried pine wood saved from the previous season. The scent of burning resin rose, sweet, sharp, like a memory from some distant childhood. The medical kit was found after nearly 10 minutes of dazed rummaging in the desk drawer. Elise cleaned her wound with hydrogen peroxide, biting down on a cloth to keep from screaming, then wrapped it with gauze and old cloth tape. When she finished, cold sweat soaked her collar. She slumped onto the wooden floor, breathing hard, eyes shut, and that's when the footsteps began. Not boots, not human, but animal. Tiptoeing, slow, circling the cabin porch. Left side, then back, then returning to the front. Scraping lightly across the frozen snow as if probing. Elise dared not move. She wasn't afraid, but didn't understand. Didn't know. Couldn't be sure what was waiting out there. Or waiting to come in. Wind howled through the door cracks. It's a screech like the forest's long exhale, listening. And then, silence. She fell asleep from exhaustion on the floor beside the wood stove. No blanket, no mattress, only the fading warmth of firelight. When she woke, it was morning. Not bright, but that pale, cold kind of light, spreading dimly through fog and early smoke, made the entire cabin seem as if it was still asleep. Elise put on her coat, limped toward the door. She didn't know why she opened it. Maybe it was instinct, and they were there. Right on the doorstep. The Bobcat mother curled up in the snow, head bowed on her front legs, eyes half open, weary. The 2 cubs pressed close to her belly, buried in her thick fur as if trying to hide from the cold and from the world. Not moving, not growling, no expression, just waiting. Elise stood still for a long time, her heart pounding like a drum, not out of fear, but because the meaning of this moment was too big, too sudden, too fragile to be broken by words. They didn't leave. They didn't retreat into the forest. They chose to stay within human sight, in the uncertain presence of a being not of their kind, with a trust Elise herself didn't believe she deserved. She went back inside, fetched an old blanket, a tray of water, and some smoked meat from the freezer. Opened the shed next to the cabin, cleared a corner, laid down some fabric, swept away the dust from the previous summer. Then she stood in the doorway. Didn't call, didn't signal, just left the door open. Every creature deserves the right to choose. An hour passed, then 2, then 3. Snow fell lightly, gathering on the mother bobcat's back, but she didn't move. The cubs remained curled up like thin shadows of their mother. And then, the sound of footsteps. The mother stood, wobbled, dragged her hind leg, and moved toward the open door. There are looks, once seen, you never forget. Like the look the mother bobcat gave the lens of the camera mounted on the shed roof. Not hiding, not afraid, not panicked, just looking. Clear, intentional, as if she knew she was being watched, as if she accepted Elise's presence, not as an intruder, but as part of the story. Elise sat on the cabin doorstep, just over 10 meters from the shed. The camera was wired to a small monitor on the wooden table, where she watched everything, the cubs breathing, the mother's resting pose, every slight movement when the wind howled through the cracks in the walls. On the 3rd day, the larger cub began to play, rolling onto its mother's back, occasionally pouncing on its sibling's ear before darting off. But the smaller one did not. It stayed curled in a corner, breathing lightly but rapidly, chest rising and falling as if struggling just to exist. Whenever the mother called with her soft chirp, it slowly raised its head but didn't step forward. Each day, Elise placed dried meat in a metal tray just outside the shed door. She watched silently as the mother bobcat ate, always last after letting her cubs feed first. But the smaller one never touched any of it. She knew. From her years in research, she recognized the signs. That tiny body was letting go. That night, the wind howled more fiercely than usual. The old cedar branches scraped against the window like claws. Elise didn't sleep, just sat by the window, clutching a wooden mug to hold on to the last bit of warmth. On the camera screen, the shed's blurry silhouette flickered under the soft pink glow of a low-hanging bulb. And then she saw it. The mother bobcat stood at the doorway, didn't step out, didn't eat. She simply nudged something forward. It was the weaker cub. It staggered, didn't cry, didn't resist. The mother wasn't gentle, nor was she harsh. Just resolute. A gentle nudge with her head, a push with her nose, and then it sat before the shed's door, alone. The mother turned away, walked off, left it, didn't look back. Elise opened the cabin door. The wind rushed in like a long sob. She dropped to her knees, heart pounding like battle drums. That small creature, its fur wet, trembling like a sapling in a storm, sat huddled before the threshold, not begging, not fleeing, just waiting. Not waiting in despair, but as an act of surrender, a decision not born of instinct, but something beyond it. She picked it up. The body weighed nearly nothing. Just a bundle of bones wrapped in soft fur, its heartbeat fluttering like a faint knock from a distant room. Elise whispered, "Your mother trusts me. I won't let her down." She laid it on a blanket beside the fire, where she had once lain wounded. close to the flames, but not too close. Set a bowl of warm water beside it, a tray of diluted goat milk, the only thing a fragile stomach like that might tolerate. It didn't resist, didn't cry, but when Elise placed her hand on its chest, that tiny heart was still beating. She felt something crack inside her, a hairline fracture, not enough to bleed, but enough to let loose all the things she had sealed tight within her. The wind blew all night. Outside, the mother never returned, never stalked nearby, never checked, as if she had let go, as if she had said, "This part is no longer mine." The next morning, as the sun rose just past the jagged mountain ridges, Elise stepped onto the porch, her eyes dark-circled but oddly bright. On the snow lay a young pine branch. Someone or something had left it there, not chewed, not broken, just placed. A sign, a message, a silent promise. She named it Wisp. Like a trail of smoke, something nearly invisible, but still real. Light, fragile, and achingly beautiful in the way you only notice when it's about to disappear. 12 days by the fire. Elise had never bonded with a life like that. No words, no sounds, just the faintest breath held between two palms. Wisp breathed through effort. Every feeding was a battle. Some nights, Elise had to drip warm goat milk gently onto its lips, patient like a mother guarding a life she hadn't given birth to. Wisp never scratched, never hissed. It simply lay there, eyes half open, yet unafraid, as if it knew who was holding it, knew it was being granted borrowed time, knew that, however brief, this was the gentlest chapter it would ever have. Elise never slept a full night during those 12 days, but she didn't complain, didn't feel tired. She read poetry to Wisp, lines by Mary Oliver about life and death. She whispered to it about the animals she had seen, snow leopards in the Himalayas, forest elephants in Cameroon, polar bears in Churchill. She even told stories about Vincent, the friend who was gone, the one who once believed that these creatures understood more than we ever gave them credit for. One night, in the dark, Wisp laid its head in her lap, not from exhaustion, but as if listening. Elise cried without realizing it. Not from despair, but because, for the first time in years, she no longer felt like a stranger in this world. And then, on the morning of the 13th day, Wisp didn't wake up again. Its body warmed, then cooled in Elise's arms, just as the sun rose above the old cedar outside the porch. No sound, no struggle. Just gone, as gently as it had arrived. Elise sat motionless for a long time. The old blanket once used by her aunt to cradle countless forest lives is now soaked in tears. She held the tiny body close to her chest, as if she could hold on for just a few more seconds. But no, a part of her knew. Wisp had fulfilled its role, not to survive, but to awaken something inside her. Even Vincent never could. She wrapped Wisp in a piece of linen, white, soft, clean. She didn't bury it right away. She placed it on the table by the window so it could still look out at the woods if there was anything beyond this life. And then, footsteps. The mother bobcat returned at dusk. No howls, no snarls, no scratching at the door. She simply stood at the porch in the last light of day, where snow fell in quiet, heavy threads. The remaining cub followed, stronger now, wide-eyed and cautious, but not afraid. Elise opened the door. No words, no sound. She simply placed Wisp wrapped and still on the wooden floor of the porch. The mother approached. Slowly, lifted her head, then lowered it, gently brushing Elise's hand. A gesture too brief to call a caress, but long enough to call understanding. In Elise's tear-blurred eyes, everything softened, yet she clearly saw. The mother bowed her head once more, as if in tribute to a soul. Then she picked Wisp up by the cloth, so delicately that the wrappings didn't shift. She didn't turn her back, didn't rush. She just walked into the white snow, carrying her dead child, as if it were still alive. Elise stood alone on the porch for a long time. The wind was cold, but she felt nothing, only emptiness, but not despair. A strange hollow, like setting a place at the table for someone who will never return, but you set it anyway. Because you know they once sat there. That spring came very slowly. It didn't rush in like a joyful chorus, but crept forward, like something that had known loss. The snow melted in small patches. Water dripped from the shed's tin roof in a slow rhythm. On the windowsill, a green shoot broke through a crack in the rotted wood. Elise sat on the porch, recording it all by hand, without a computer. No typing needed, just listening and writing. The book was born from that. The Wild That Waited. A whispered epic written for the things that no longer knew how to speak. The forest, the wind, the bobcat, and herself. Elise didn't send the manuscript to any major publisher. She printed it at a small press downtown, recycled paper, soft brown ink. Each copy was a confession, a way to preserve the things that were slowly vanishing. The book spread quietly, without noise. But whoever picked it up never forgot it. The shed, once a refuge for the Bobcat family, now bore a wooden sign at the front. Sanctuary for the lost in the woods. Elise couldn't save them all. Some lived, some died. But each winter, the shed lit up again. A small, dim yellow lamp hangs by the door, not just to guide wild creatures, but to remind her she was still here. On nights when the snow fell heavily, when the world seemed buried beneath white, Elise would lie still, ear pressed to the blanket, listening. The howling wind, the snapping branches, and sometimes a soft scratching at the wooden door. Not clear, not harsh, just a whisper, "I'm still out there." And then, that morning, it was colder than usual. The sun had yet to rise, but the fog was thinning. Elise opened the door, as always, and froze. A young bobcat, very young, not yet as full-bodied as her mother. Sleek fur, small limbs, ears standing tall, and behind her, 2 cubs. They stood in the pale early light, amid the fading mist and damp frost on the ground. They didn't step forward, didn't flee, just looked. Elise didn't speak right away. She just looked back, her chest tightening as something quietly broke open inside her. Then, in a whisper, like calling to her own past self, "You're Wisp's child, aren't you?" The bobcat didn't answer. Of course not, but she blinked slowly, not by reflex, but as an answer. Then she turned, called her cubs with a soft chirp, like wind brushing a chime on the porch. The 3 walked into the forest, not hurried, not afraid, just disappeared. Into the tree, it's still damp with dew. Into the cedar, its budding new leaves, carrying a piece of Elise's soul. She stood there for a long time. Didn't cry, didn't smile. Just placed her hand on her chest, where Wisp once slept in her arms, and whispered, we still remember each other, don't we? In this world, where people rush and forget, there are still moments like that. Moments that can't be translated into human words, only kept through silence, through breath, through the belief that miracles never vanish. They only wait for quiet places to return. And every snowy night, in the soft glow of the little light hanging by the shed door, Elise still leaves the door slightly open for the wild souls, if they need shelter.